Hello, good morning. Welcome to the third day of the Baltic Summer School of Digital Humanities. And today will be a little bit different compared to previous days. And probably the day will seem a little bit longer because we have two workshops in the afternoon. One will be dedicated to collecting web data for digital humanities and then followed by the students' poster session. But this morning we will have another guest who will join us remotely. Maciej Maryl, hello. Can you say hello to everyone? Yes. Yeah, we see you good now. We hopefully will hear you too in a minute. So Maciej will give a lecture on studying cultural transformation on the basis of bibliographical data. And those who work in a library know that this is a real treat for us because one of the main tasks of national libraries is creating bibliographical data. So this is one of our gold mines. And so we're really eager to learn what we can do with this data. Dr. Maciej Maryl is an assistant professor and founding director of the Digital Humanities Center at the Institute of Literary Research of the Polish Academy of Sciences. He is involved in European research infrastructures for digital humanities as a member of Opera's Executive Assembly, SSH Open Cluster Governing Board, and co-chair of DARIA Digital Methods and Practices Observatory. His interests include data science applied to cultural data, innovation in scholarly communication, and meta-research on digital practices in the humanities. And hopefully we will we'll be able to hear you, Maciej. Welcome, and I give you the floor. Yes.
Hi, so do you hear me now? Do you hear me or you don't hear me? Hello, hello? Hello, do you hear me?
We hear you very well, yes.
I think we have a... okay, sorry. Because I think that we had the problem at the beginning. Perfect. So hi, so first of all, thank you so much for having me. And apologies for not being there in person. I mean, I tried, but unfortunately, it's collided with the holiday schedule already. So I really wish I was there with you. So I try to do my best to be, entertaining remotely as good as I can. And I want to show you some of the examples from my own work, but with this idea that just to give you some ideas what could be done, what of this stuff you can use in your own research adventures. One of the things, I mean, interestingly enough, in terms of the summer school that I'm using, actually two tools that will be or are already described a bit during your courses, which is Tableau and Gephi. So I think you can get a kind of from this lecture kind of idea of how you can apply them to your own research projects, and I think that what's crucial here is just this general idea. So I will not get into so much technical details. However, in the discussion session, if there are any detailed questions, I'll be definitely happy to get deeper in whatever aspect of the work you'll be happy with. And I'm sharing the presentation, so you see the presentation, I hope. Yes. Oh, I see it now too. Okay, in the screen. Perfect. So let us begin. So first I'll just start with some general context, and we'll be getting into more detail with every slide. So let us just begin with this general idea of data in the humanities. So I'm also chairing this e-humanities working group within ALIA. ALIA is this, European-wide association of academies, and our working group is dedicated to look at the new methods in the humanities and how we can help academias to kind of digitize their progress. And 3 years ago, we came up with this report. Currently, we're working on another one, but that's another question. But this one is very special because we wanted to look at the data in the humanities, because there's always talk about data in research, fair data, sharing the data, etc., etc. However, we felt, and we got it from our colleagues in the academies, that there's a problem in the humanities in kind of conceptualizing what your data is, how you can use it, where you can use it, what to do with it. So we started with this report to kind of open this discussion, and also, not surprisingly, we do it with the academies, because the academies are responsible for all those kind of long-term projects like editions, bibliographies, lexicons, lexicography, etc., which in turn become a fuel for our digital humanities work, about which in a second. So the first thing actually we do when talking about the data in the humanities is kind of how to identify them. And in my presentation, I will focus mostly on the data for literary studies, but you can say look at literary and cultural studies, basically, because they can be used for both. So if we look at the literary studies, the first thing in terms of data that comes to our mind is the text. So we have text which could be understood both, in a visual form, as here we have a scan of the Macbeth folio, and basically we can analyze it both as a image here, text on the screen, but also, of course, as a words, and this is like what basically scholars have been doing for centuries with literature. And of course, here we have the digital form, which allows us to better grasp the text and what we do with those texts. That will be discussed in just a second. But that's just one of those issues we have. But another thing we have is metadata. So metadata is metadata, the data about data. So in this case, data about the publication. So we can collect information about each a volume, each with as you can see here, there's like just one of those hundreds of bibliographic databases. We can have information about format, authors, genre, sometimes subject, language, publication place, country, year of publication. Sometimes you have some classification, keywords, etc., abstract, etc., etc. So there's another data we can use, and usually, until recently, we've used them mostly to identify the work. So we were looking for a work, you took a reference to find the text somewhere in a library or in an archive. But then there's also the third kind of data in literary studies, something we can call data about culture. So in this case, I used some Polish examples. It doesn't really matter what it is in this case, but you can see there are some indexes here. There's a bibliographical lexicon, which describes here one of the Polish essayist Andrzej Kijowski with some data about his life. So in literary studies, we used to collect lots of documents like this, also in terms of calendars, of whatever authors where things were published, important events in history, especially, etc., etc. And all this data were used mostly as a kind of reference book, basically. That if you want to learn something about Andrzej Kijowski, you go to the library, you take the volume, you read this entry, and you kind of know more or less something about it. You can go further. You can find some references here to his works, find those books, and go further. However, the digital turn gives us an unprecedented opportunity to actually use all those kind of descriptions, indexes, metadata, as data for our research. So we can kind of repurpose them and fuel our research projects with this stuff. So let me give you the example. So how the this kind of data approach changes the way we read. So on one hand, we have the Macbeth. We had it. We've seen it before, but now we think of Macbeth not only as a text, but also as a kind of somehow a network of relationships between characters, and those connections could be basically derived from the text. And here you have a really interesting example of on this website of the of different approaches to networks in Macbeth. Perhaps this is a good moment to tell you that I will share the slides afterwards, so you get all the links I'm talking about. You'll get them after the presentation. But nevertheless, so the idea is that we kind of through looking not only at text but also looking at connections between protagonists, looking at how they appear, how they interact with each other, we can analyze the text, or also this kind of, in this case, like this kind of social level of interaction in this drama, and get a bit deeper, get more knowledge, different kind of knowledge about text. So basically, this is what using this kind of data approach towards materials allows us to do. But that's like one example. There's literature. However, we can also do it manually, and we can try to work with text with kind of pinpointing what's kind of interesting for us. And here again, this is another example from our project in the Digital Humanities Center in Warsaw. Sorry, it's in Polish, but I just wanted to show you the how interesting it could be when you work with, for instance, with letters. So here we have a correspondence between two writers. And our annotators, with some support of machine learning tools, but mostly by hand, tag the entities in text. So you have in yellow there are persons, in blue you have places, and in red are organizations. So they go through the correspondence, they tag this stuff, and later, of course, that creates a nice tool to find where whatever this person was mentioned. But also, you can try to analyze the network of relationships emerging from this from this text and analyze it. I mean, in the case of correspondence, of how things and people and concepts are connected. So and you can do it both by hand, of course, but also using some named entity extraction tools, which are getting better and better. And actually, the current developments in artificial intelligence are also like pretty helpful, because the large language models are really pretty capable of getting out the entities and sometimes the relationships between them from texts. But yeah, that's not the topic today. We'll focus on what's what's more important in those texts, and how we kind of change the our thinking about the data in literary studies. So here's the example of this kind of remediation of data sources we experience in the humanities. Remediation is this concept that that the new medium kind of brings the new affordances, but basically somehow recreates the old medium in itself. So the good example is how, for instance, early prints mimicked manuscripts, like remediated them, or I don't know, new websites, for instance, first websites mimicked newspapers, etc., etc. So we have this sort of kind of evolution of cultural forms. And here, this is an example of Polish literary bibliography, and I put it also on purpose because I'll be working with those data, but just wanted to show you how this process goes. So in the first picture, you see basically this printed website, sorry, printed page with the record, bibliographical record. So basically saying, you know, this is a book about this is a book printed here. You get some metadata, you get the author, you get some classification there, and this is how this project was funded in 1954 and ran more or less in this kind of same for almost half a century. And I'm sure that in Latvia you have similar projects, and some disciplines have their own bibliographies, and etc. But basically in around 2001, there was an issue, mostly actually based on the economical purposes, that there was no budget to print those bibliographies anymore. So there was like, hey, perhaps we could switch to the digital form. So they created this really complicated Oracle database and kind of recreated the same bibliography in the digital form. However, which was important for us here, the main purpose for this tool back then was still like information retrieval. So not so much research, but you know, basically this idea that somebody comes to the resource to find, you know, what was written about this person. Not so much, you know, taking their own data. There was no thinking about, you know, that this data could be useful someday. And 10 years later, around 10 years later, we kind of again reinvented the project, the new PBL a database, already trying to create a data model which is not sort of recreation of the printed text, but more capable of showing links between entities in the database. So like who, whatever, reviews whom, try to disambiguate the entities, so we are sure that one person is the same one. We can differentiate easily between two persons with the same name, etc. So we start to link our data with other external resources, like, you know, like VF or Wikidata for disambiguation and for actually further data enrichment. And the final step actually here, and it's also, I think, important for this general discussion, this kind of road from print to linked open data, is the European Literary Bibliography, which is currently a project, kind of joint project of Polish and Czech literary bibliography, but also we started cooperation with Finnish bibliographies, I think Spanish too, actually. So it's kind of expands slowly throughout Europe, maybe one day throughout the globe, who knows. But what's important here is that starting with this kind of printed volume, we get to the situation in which we have some records that could be put together with similar records from other countries. So we can, for instance, trace now, you know, publications about the same author in different countries, or translations of, you know, Polish authors in Czechia, or reception of Czech authors in Poland, etc. So it gives us this kind of tool to navigate the ecosystem of bibliographical data and get more and new insights. So this idea of bibliographic data being like kind of cornerstone of this kind of new research is kind of fueling right now a really vibrant a working group in DARIA. DARIA is this European Research Infrastructure Consortium for Arts and Humanities. And within this, there's this bibliodata, from bibliographical data working group, which recently published this report about the landscape of bibliographical data in the humanities. And I will not discuss it too much here, but if you're interested, especially from the perspective of your country, it would be you can take a look at this. However, what I wanted to show, and sorry, the picture is a bit blurry. I took it from the publication, but what I wanted to show you is that, which is important for this work as well, that this kind of work has lots of different stakeholders. So it's not only, whatever bibliographers and researchers like working on something, but we have bibliographical data scattered in different places. Some research infrastructures have them, information services, publishers, and the interest for different users is huge, but still we have them in different countries, in different places, usually in national libraries, but sometimes in different institutions. And the goal is to have them interoperable, interconnected, so as to facilitate the research. And also one of the elements really important here is to and probably this would be what I'm doing here today, is to reach out to researchers and show them the possibilities of using those materials to actually work with this data to do some research, to respond to some actual research questions. So let's see how it could be done. So this would be the pipeline, the steps of BiblioData research project. It doesn't sound probably too new to you, because it's basically the steps of the research project in general. However, I will focus separately on those 4 points because I think that they are crucial, also in the light of what we've been saying today. So first of all, formulate research questions that could be answered through a data-driven approach. Prepare and understand your data set, operationalize your research questions, and finally analyze your data. And I will use my my own project just as this kind of to just show you how I'm doing this stuff on and in practice, basically. So let's start with the challenge. So as you know from the title, there's a kind of the topic of this presentation will revolve around the literary transformation in Polish culture, or the transition period, 1989-2002, and why actually this period that will be discussed in a minute, but that's actually also a part of this data-driven approach. So the idea I had was to basically to look how the BiblioData could be used to research the literary life, to model the transition, to work with it. So basically, what kind of new insights we can get from the data approach for cultural and literary studies. Quick crash course on Polish literary life after 45. I guess it could be similar with all those, of course, other differences, but in terms of basic structure, I think that it could follow the similar pattern in the countries of the Eastern Bloc, that basically in Poland after World War II, we had a kind of mixed model. There were still some publishers surviving from World War II, trying to reestablish their businesses. But basically, since 1950s, more or less, there was a full state monopoly on publishing. So just big publishers and big state-funded publishers, which could have a monopoly on everything. Starting with 76, we can have a dual model with a second circulation, so-called drugi obieg, which is like this illegal circulation of prints. And here, Poland and Czechia probably were two biggest markets for those illegal prints in the bloc. And then there was a 1989-ish and the transition towards a free market model. So that's basically, so just we have this this more or less this overview of how and the backdrop on which I will show my findings. And what I wanted to do is basically to look at how the transition was viewed by critics, by literary critics, literary researchers, and to try to operationalize those ideas and look if we can find them in the data. And as you can see, they used lots of nice metaphors. We have appetite for change, disappearance of the center, state of dispersion, movable margins, and then normalization, return of the old masters, fixed margins, and return of the center. So there are like all those different narratives, but basically the overview is that the main thing is that there's this idea that the first part of the 90s is a kind of decentralization of the market, with lots of things going on in smaller communities, and then that we move towards re-centralization under, new, let's say, free market capitalist principles. So that's the main idea. So from those ideas, I derived those hypotheses. And sorry for this lots of text, but we'll get to those hypotheses one by one. That then they will be probably clearer. But basically, what you need to get now is that again, there's this narrative of dispersion of literary life in the first half of the 90s, then the more centralized model, the literary reception, so reviewers, reviewer attention follows the same pattern. And the hypothesis 3 is that in the first phase, the reception was focused more on debutantes, then it moved to old masters, so more established writers. And finally, those processes should also have this geographical dimension, meaning that, we start with different, even smaller cities, but then again, we get the reconcentration within the large communities. Sorry, not communities, but not large cities. So that's basically this. I think this is like a necessary crash course on those issues, and I hope the other parts then will be a bit clearer. But then we move to prepare and understand your data set, and that's tricky. And that's why I highlighted, because that's tricky, because very often in the age we have examples of researchers trying to respond to their research problems without properly assessing whether the data sets can actually answer them. One good example, I don't know, maybe I'm too old, because that's kind of old example, but if you remember Google Ngrams, that was like a thing in whatever, like 10 years ago, or maybe not so long time ago. But basically, that there were those corpora scanned by Google, and you could do like Ngram analysis on them, and there were lots of fuss around them, lots of people working with it, and then suddenly there was this question, but what's in it? I mean, what kind of data we have? Can we really say that, okay, this word was used in I don't know, like 50 years ago more often than this one, but we don't know basically what kind of material is in this corpus we're working on. So that's why it's very crucial to be sure that you know what's under the hood, basically. So this kind of approach to really look into data came from this something called like replication crisis. I mean, it was like basically discussion, great debate within social sciences and humanities, but also kind of touched upon the digital humanities. So, of course, the main question, whether we can actually replicate the results, meaning that if we use the same methods and the same data, can we get the same results? Which means that, of course, that the method is valid. But the problem with many early approaches, like those by Franco Moretti or Matthew Jockers, were that that both the access to resources was kind of the resources was not obvious. So they had some corpora, but due to whatever copyright and difficult reasons, they would not disclose them. And also the methods were explained, but we couldn't actually get, I don't know, in some cases, like just get a code to replicate something. And so the question was whether really we can say that the work shows something, some phenomenon or not. It's hard to assess if we don't have the data to do that. So that's why Catherine Bode, and by the way, this is a really interesting book, reading by numbers. If you'd be interested in pursuing the some work with bibliographical data, that's a must. It's a really good a good piece. But she's kind of advocating for this bibliographical consciousness in data-rich literary history. So data-rich literary history meaning literary history based on data, whatever we find them, we try to assess them. But she said she's saying basically that what we need to focus on is that we build a really good data set, and we know what's in it, and we know that it answers our question. And so she more or less saying that we can start small. That it's better to start small with small data sets, small range of the questions, and then, but then we're sure that we can really answer them. And of course, it's kind of discouraging that when you want to do, I don't know, like Moretti did, like, you know, work on the entire Victorian era or something like this. It's discouraging when you end up like with smaller range, like 10 years or something. But still, in this case, it's better to work on small scale, but be sure that that you actually have data to work with. So that's my data. So again, the Polish literary bibliography once again, but as you can see, that's just as this resource, pretty in brief, is registers lots of different aspects of literary life. So we have authors, works, reviews, articles, contests, awards, adaptations, events, exhibitions, etc. And my data set, again, ranges from 89 to 2002, mostly been now partial disclosure. That's mostly because of the fact that we have digitized data for this period. And now I mean, it's a bit more, but we're still struggling with retro digitization, so with earlier actually records, but hopefully soon enough we'll have them. Basically this is a data set, but it's just for information. I'm not going to get into too much detail with those numbers, but just want to show you this, which is the kind of resulting network of relationships within in the database I'm working with. So we can see how things are connected and how we can look into this interconnected system of literary life. So you can see here that we have a person who could be an author who writes a book, but also it could be a critic who writes about a book or about another, basically another work. We have journal articles, could be, of course, could be written by somebody, but could be about a person, about someone. We have publishers. We have locations, so publisher can publish journal, book, and be located somewhere, so we can look at the geographical dimension. And we have also like literary prizes. So basically the awards, who gets the award and when. And as you can see, maybe that is a quick explanation. It's not the entire data set what we have here. So this is like a kind of part of it. So some of the data is not ready to use, but also some of the data we did not use on purpose, like for instance, data on adaptations, because it gives just another dimension, and we just wanted to scale to a manageable kind of chunk of work, so we could work with it. So again, this is this approach that we want to have the data set, which is perhaps a bit smaller. We could have a bigger one, but this one we manage. We know also what's in it. And just one thing, I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but then still there are also like methodologies behind those bibliographies, etc. So you also have to be sure that you know how things are collected here, because you know in literary bibliography, you're not, if you're a literary scholar, you can say, okay, this could be literature or this is not literature. You can just think about it, write a paper about it. But in literary bibliography, you just have to decide, this is literature and this is not literature. This is something that goes to the database, this thing does not. And there are also other rules, and you have to be aware of them on the process of collecting data, so you can have this data set ready. Okay, so now we have a research question. we have a data set sort of, and we just move to the operationalization, which is again a difficult task. So here I couldn't find a good picture, so I just asked Bing to generate one for me, because this is more or less what we're doing with trying to operationalize things with data with bibliodata we have. So as Moretti said, operationalization is building bridge from concepts to measurements. So we have the idea and we just try to measure it. However, the problem is that our data may not be complete, may be scattered, may be difficult to grasp, or maybe or there are like other things. So in my case, for instance, I wanted to. I mean, I'm working on this transition, but definitely I wanted to start a bit earlier in the 80s, like 85, or even to have like 80s and 90s and to compare them. Unfortunately, we don't have this data at hand yet, so I had to kind of operationalize my work in this manner that it could still respond to the question, but alas, we don't have the full data set. So how to deal with it? With the problem that you have great research questions, but not so strong data to respond to them. So one thing is to create subsets to kind of work with smaller data on some issues. Another issue would be to narrow down your research questions, which is kind of what I'm doing. So I'm not so much looking at the evolution in the 80s because I cannot, and find more data. It's also always a good thing, but not always they are available. And sometimes, of course, it's too time consuming to work with. So that's why we have those puzzles that don't always fit together, but we have to kind of work with it to come up with this coherent research design. And then we can start the analysis. And what I'm going to show you would be just two approaches. I mean, there would be many different approaches, but two general ones. So one would be more based on stats, on basically how we have the measures over time, and another approach would be based more on networks. So let's start with this kind of statistical approach, moreover, and those hypotheses we have. So you remember there was this hypothesis: the institutions of literary life undergo dispersion in the early 90s and subsequently returned to the more centralized model. So I operationalized it, so basically translated into my data, so that dispersion of literary production entails increase in the number of small publishers, small journals or publishing centers disseminating literary content over time. So dispersion means more smaller players. Whereas centralization would mean the reverse: smaller players, smaller number of big players overtaking literary communication. And I kind of discriminated between big and small publishers by basically the number of books or journals they publish. So here, in the first slide, you can see the evolution of literary field. So basically, the number of books and journal pieces published. So this is just the general tendency, but you can see it's basically this is the growth tendency, at least in terms of literary journal pieces, literary authors, and literary books published. But this is just to give you the overview. But this is like one of my favorite, actually, favorite visualizations. And it's made, by the way, in Tableau. So if you're working in Tableau, this is something you can do in this environment. So basically, we can see, and we can see still this rupture we discussed about the kind of mid-90s. So we can see this process of that, the number of big publishers is going steady. Big journal, the number of big journals is getting down, but then suddenly, or just eventually, I would rather say, it skyrockets. And especially it's visible here if you compare how many big journals, big publishers, you have here, and and in the early 80s, you can clearly kind of see this this trend. And also, if you compare it with the number of active publishers, so you have more active publishers, the green thing in the small brackets. I don't know if you see my cursor, but it's basically in the small brackets inside the graph. The green belt is smaller in the beginning, and it gets it's large in the beginning, so more active publisher, and gets smaller in the end. So we can see kind of can track those issues that were spotted by critics. The second hypothesis was that the literary reception would follow the same pattern. So again, the operationalization, try to translate it into data. So to analyze the tendency for centralizing the literary taste, we need to compare the number of books with its reception. So namely, how many times a particular book is reviewed, discussed, or mentioned. And this is also like pretty compelling example. So you see in blue books from big publishers, in red books from small publishers, and the higher the graph goes is the number of book reviews. So basically, you can see that books from small publishers get more featured until more or less mid-90s, and then they are overtaken by books by big publishers. And that's similar take, I mean, it's a bit different take, but on the similar data. So how the ratio of book reviews compare with the numbers of books and the published. And in green, we have ratio of reviews of books published by small and big publishers. So again, we can see the small publishers are trying kind of losing the ground after the more roughly in the second half of the 90s. I also use the Gini coefficient. So this is also an example of how you can adapt some measures into your own workflow. Gini coefficient you probably know more from economy, because it's used kind of to measure the inequality in societies. But in this case, we can consider literary life as a kind of system in which attention given to authors, in three ways: by publishing their books, by publishing their journal pieces, and by writing about them, is a kind of attention that could be measured. So I kind of measured it, and the Gini coefficient, takes the value between 0 and 1. So 1 means perfect equality. 0 is a perfect equality, and 1 means absolute inequality. So it's like there's no equality at all, and it's quite unsurprising that we get like roughly mid results. So the literary culture is not equal, of course, because we get some more attention to particular authors and less attention to more or less the long tail of literary production. But what's interesting is that we get more kind of equality in terms of attention given to book authors, which is kind of interesting. But that's hypothesis 2, and let's just go to the hypothesis 3, which will involve the actual authors. So the idea that in the first phase with dispersion, there was focus on debutantes, and then it changed in the re-centralization phase into more attention given to the old masters, so like old established writers, the writers established even before 1989. Again, the operationalization, and here it's a good example actually of how you need to make some decisions and of course stick to them, but also be transparent about them, because it's hard to say. Of course, we have to operationalize who a debutant is, because it's taken again from the writings by the critics. So they would just basically think they have a concept of debutant, but then when you work with data, you have to have a definition of a debutant. So for the study, we used the idea of debutant being the person who has not published anything before 1989, whereas masters were those authors who were highly popular before 1989, and we just chose just 11 of them because, again, to have this kind of master status. And you can see in the data that actually this kind of process is visible. So you can see the publications and number of works published on x-axis and number of reception pieces of y-axis. So basically, you can see that we have some stars in the right top corner. So that's publish the most and also get the most reception, and in the left down corner, so the fewer reception, the fewer people publish. And interestingly enough, one of the debutants that scores the best, you can see it's somewhere in the middle. The red dot is Olga Tokarczuk, who later receive the Nobel Prize, but in this data set, she's just a kind of beginning, I mean, at the beginning writer, but 90s is the process when she became more established in Poland. So we can kind of see already the this process going on. And here again, this is the same reception over time. Oh, sorry, I got the feedback.
Maciej, I'm hate to.
So here we. Yeah.
Maciej, I'm hate to interrupt you, but
yes.
On our side, your voice got somewhat corrupted. We're thinking maybe we can try to reconnect, like try to go out of the session and then come back in, because the sound is a little bit weird for us. Can we do that? Just try one more time.
Okay, sure.
To re-enter the session.
Okay. Okay.
I'm sorry, yes.
Okay, and do you hear me now?
Yes, it is much better now again.
Much better. Okay. Okay, perfect. So let's stick to this. So sorry for that, but where actually things go? Or should I just continue, or should I just back up a bit, or was the where you lost me?
No, please continue.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just yeah. So sorry for that. But that's the so for you the downside of the remote review lecture is that we don't see each other. For me, it's also like this, so that I can see and cannot react. But let's try. So I'm just sharing the screen just once again. Sorry. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So this is where we are, where we were. Okay. So the reception of masters and debutants. So as you can see that we have basically this process, the debutants get more traction, but also it's because they're not debutants anymore, so they get more attention, and we have those spikes in the reception for old masters. But then later, when you look at the data, they actually correspond with, you know, some anniversaries. So for instance, 96 is the year that Wisława Szymborska, one of the masters, got the Nobel Prize. So she was like a really top star. So that's why this literary attention is really high here. Again, the good example of that, you know, when you have those results, you just get back to the data and see what they mean is, you know, it's not just like we have those results and they speak for everything. We just have to, we still have to interpret them. Okay, I will be slowly speeding up with hypothesis 4. So the process of dispersion and recentralization also has a kind of geographical dimension, which should be visible as the rise and the decline of small publishing centers. So again, we try to look whether it's visible geographically. So one geographical view is, I mean, it's just like this, just to give you the idea how we can see the journals on the left are pretty dispersed, but the book publishing on the right is pretty concentrated in Poland. And so this again, this graph shows you those two graphs actually. On one hand, the number of works published in cities with high and low production over time, and number of cities publishing literary works in general below. So the red goes for low literary production, and the square goes for books. Sorry for that. Okay. So moving on, though I would just pass on this and just move straight to the network analysis, so the integrated approach. So you've seen this this screen before. That's this is our network of relationships, and now we want to see how the relationships between the entities in our networks created through bibliographical data can actually tell us something about our research questions we have. So first important thing to be mentioned is that when you're working, and later we'll be working with Gephi, always remember that most of the programs for graph analysis work on the assumption that you have a monomodal network. Monomodal is a network, you know, in which you have the same types of nodes. So like relationships between people. So for instance, friendship relationships. So everybody can, but doesn't have to be a friend of somebody. Whereas on the left, you can see here you have a bimodal network. So you have two types of networks, and it's difficult. So for instance, when is the network of people and institution, or like, you know, author and a journal. So authors can kind of link with journals with authors, but not so much journals with each other. So what you need to do in cases like this one, if you want to work with networks, is to create a kind of projection. So create out of the different relationships you can between different entities. You should create a relationship between the same type of entity. So, and this is a classic example that you have two ways to do it. There's a bibliographic coupling or co-citation. So in the first case, basically, we assume that, you know, for instance, if A cites C, D, E, F, and B cites the same authors, that means the connections between A and B. And also in the other way around, if they are cited by some authors, we can make connections between them. So we just make the connections only between the entities where this is possible. So this how it looks in our case. This is like this kind of hairball. It's the network of all those connections we have, and you have creators, authors, which is like writers, authors like critics, publishers, and journals in this huge network. So I did this monomodal projection. So try to recreate the relationships between authors and other entities into relationships between authors. So if the author published a book, author A published a book in the same journal as author B, that means the connections between them, and we leave the journal out, basically. But that's so it's good to remember, because all the algorithms
kind of, or most of them, based on this assumption that you have the same entities in your network. Okay, but it's still, you see, the network is nice, but it's and colorful, but it's still a way to go to actually understand something out of it. It's colored because we detected some communities which cluster together, but still this whole literary system is huge and hard to comprehend. So what we can do analyzing the networks, we can work on high level and on individual level. So let's start on the high level, on the level of the whole network. So what we can do, for instance, is to compare the networks between, for instance, as in this case, the first half of the 90s and the second half of the 90s. Already visually, you can see which kind of would go against some of our earlier assumptions, and some more differences and more kind of hubs, but less concentrated in the later network here. But we can take a look at those different measures of multimodal networks, and again, it's not easy to do like a crash course of network theory, but in a short lecture. But basically, what I wanted to convey is that we have different measurements, and again, you can take them from Gephi as well. If you work with Gephi, you can run some stats and get those global stats on your network to see how it looks. So, for instance, you can see that we have more nodes. Nodes is an element of the network in the second phase. So more authors, more people, more connections as well. Edges are connections between relationships. So again, so the second network is also more complicated. It's more robust. There's more going on, and the average degree seems to be higher, meaning that there are more prominent nodes in the network. The degree is the measure of how well connected a node is. And finally, there's a higher number of communities in the weakly components, which means that actually the second network seems to be more complex, more scattered, and more into smaller communities, which kind of would run against the assumption of the criticism, and against the results we had kind of earlier. But let's look at other dimensions. We can also measure those dimensions yearly to see the evolutions, to compare this global stats with each other on different years. But also we can look at this at the graph, and here you can see how this average degree is kind of played in the network throughout the years. And I used some algorithms that works also with the two-mode network. So I use also the network with writers and institutions, and another just for writers. And mostly you can see that after that we have really centralized networks with like some really big prominence writers in the beginning. This is a huge recent realization dump, but afterwards we can see also that the kind of emergence of more prominent, more centralized writers. The average degree of so the number of how well connected elements is kind of growing. So again, we can see some pattern emerging here and recreating this kind of idea of dispersion and some recentralization. Okay, just to slowly moving to an end, so we can also have some time for discussion. I also wanted to look at the individual stats. So we looked at the level of the whole networks, whole communities, whole big processes, and now it's time to actually also look at the individual writers. And also the problem is that we have many writers in the nodes, a few hundred thousands actually, entities, and we just want to look at the to get something meaningful out of it. And one way to do it is just to look at the individual stats. So basically, this is the table of those first 20-something entities in our network, ranked according to their weighted degree. So this, again, this measure of, let's say, how prominent they are in the network. So we can so with the network analysis, you can do two things here. So one would be to look at this visually, and we'll do it in a second. And another thing would be to actually look at the same people, how prominent they are throughout the years, or look at the communities of them, and try to kind of dig something more. But again, you can work on both levels, and there are different statistical measures that can help you assess their position in the network. So degree, I told you also how well connected they are. In other interesting elements, betweenness centrality. So it's basically used to what extent this node serves as a bridge between subcommunities. So, you know, somebody may not be so well connected, but may serve as an essential bridge between two communities. So here this is just the list of those top, let's say, writers. You can see that Tokarczuk already made it to the most prominent list, as well as Szymborska. But unfortunately, in this case, they're like just those two females only in the top 20, with also lots of historical authors as well. But let us look how we can visualize it and how we can work visually with this, with those individual components. So here you can see, and this it's done in Gephi, and I give you the number of nodes. So in Gephi, the really cool thing, Gephi doesn't handle too well big networks. I mean, it's slow with that, but it's possible. But one thing you can do is to filter. So I'm just showing you some filtered results, one by one. And of course, when you work with networks, it's better to have to interact with it, just to look who's there, click somewhere. But that would not be so possible with this graph. It would be just very slow. But what I wanted to show you, how you can actually approach this graph for individual analysis. So we with Gephi algorithm, there's a Louvain community detection algorithm in the network. You can try to point out some communities in your network. So how actually elements of the network cluster with each other. So the basic assumption is that they are like better connected within the network, that within the group, within the community, than with the other members of the group. And they are here highlighted by different colors, and you cannot see it, but with numbers, and even if you were to see it, that would demand some actual basically more let's say advanced knowledge of Polish literature, as we have like many authors here. But basically what we have here is we have in green the community of kind of mainstream of big established authors, which are really well connected with each other, which means that they are often featured in the same outlets, published by the same publisher, etc. Whereas, for instance, the red ones are like kind of new poets or new authors, which are also again pretty well connected because they function in the same places. But just to get a slightly better overview of this, we filter, we zoom in, so we can see that we have we had the previous slide, we had 391 nodes, which is 1.5% of everything. So you see that's just a tiny bit of the most important ones. And now we have just 196 nodes, so less than 1%. And funnily enough, this 1% is kind of almost all green. As you remember, green was this kind of mainstream. So we can see that the more granular we get with this with those nodes, we see the just those really established writers and connections. Of course, we can see who's included here. In Gephi, you can also filter by the community, so we can check the other communities who's where, and we can check the membership of those mainstream community throughout the years. So we can see, you know, for instance, that when somebody kind of got important enough or connected enough to become the part of this club. But let's zoom in again. So now that's 101 nodes visible, and I changed the coloring here, so it's not just by the group right now, by the community, but by gender right now. So you can see the females in red and green as the male authors. I mean, graphically it looks worse than it is, but it's like 1/3 females, 2/3 males. However, you can see that there are more prominent, which is prominent male writers, like in green, so they have this larger nodes, meaning the larger degree, and just 2 female writers are, which is Szymborska on top and Dąbrowska on the bottom, are prominent enough to have this big node, which also kind of tells you something about the community if you're interested in those gender dimensions. And finally, the 30 most prominent authors, and again, so then you have just two females here, and so something more or less similar to what we've seen earlier. And again, you can see, I mean, knowing the literature, knowing the topic, who's most prominent, who's closer to somebody, meaning that they may appear more or less in the same contexts more often and are better connected. But that's just more or less the problem with just showing those networks in the static form is that you cannot actually interact with them, which is the best feature of Gephi. Then you can actually work with your network, because visualization is just this kind of last step where you just show something you find important in your network, but getting there is this kind of process of interpretation, where you kind of look for the answers and try to iteratively interact with data and to interpret what you get. So getting to some conclusions and challenges we have here. I would name 3 key areas here. So data availability, data quality, and long tail of literary production. So availability, it's kind of obvious that, you know, do you have the data? Can you access the data you need? And this is all those issues of bibliographies we discussed in the beginning of this lecture. Or do you need to create the data on your own? And actually, I mean, it's not that difficult. I mean, it's just time consuming basically, but sometimes perhaps it's better to create your own data set, or within the project, you first create the data set, then you analyze it, but then you're sure that you know what's under the hood, basically. Secondly, data quality. So do you know how your data was collected? And again, the collection methodology, were there any restrictions? Were there, censorship may be a factor as well. You know, it may be something was omitted. You have to be sure that you know how the data was prepared, and something I reiterated many times. So can your data set respond to your research, be a response to your research questions? So basically, can you really use this data to answer your question? And the final issue is concerns this issue of those huge networks. So you have this kind of long tail of literary production. So you see that there are like many authors who publish just one thing, or they just publish a short story. We have them in the database, or you have like kind of least successful authors. They publish something, they got forgotten. So they call those kind of the great unread. So we have to think how to kind of work with this kind of long tail, and some of the methods are also include, for instance, removing from your network the most prominent ones, so we can, or filtering out the big authors, just so we can see how this smaller network evolves. And another way would be just to look at those communities and to see how the communities form within your network. So I will stop here with this slide with resources. So if you follow this link, you should be able to download the PDF with this presentation, which contains some of those links I discuss. If you have any question, I mean, we will probably discuss right now, but any follow-ups, just please email me. And sorry, that was not intentional. Okay, and here are also some resources I mentioned today. So Daria Bibliodata Working Group, Bibliodata Landscape Analysis, a paper in which I explain a bit more stuff I presented today. If you want to start with networks, Scott Weingard's Demystifying Networks, a great resource to do that. And also, if you're interested in networks, be sure that you follow Historical Network Research Community. There are like lots of resources, interesting issues, etc. So thank you very much, and I will be happy to take your questions. Or maybe I don't hear you actually.
Thank you. The first question will be from the chat. It's about a specific visualization, I believe. So the question is, from the comparison of the two networks, it is apparent that there are quite a few outliers, nodes not connected to other nodes. Did you have a look at them? What are they? Why are they not connected?
Yeah, thanks for this question. Yeah, it's an excellent one, and actually, it kind of resonates with what I said about those kind of great unread and but also with the methodology. So basically, what we have in our data set are those publications of Polish literature. However, sometimes you have like really small publishers. Like for instance, there's this small town cultural center that publishes the book of poetry, and then somebody, I don't know, or publish a few books or something like this, and that creates a kind of a small universe of interconnected nodes, basically, which are not, they don't go, nobody, for instance, recognizes those authors, nobody will review this work, etc. So they will just stay there as this kind of small, lonely island of literary production. So that would be the main case here. And of course, it's the question is probably also like fueled by research questions. To what extent you want to look at them? To what extent they are like interesting for understanding the literary evolution, and to what extent you actually omit them. And usually they are omitted by history of literature, but data-driven approaches kind of give them more visibility. So I would say, yeah, that this is more like probably this case of small writing communities, which are important locally, less important for the entire system, but they are still there and accounted for. I hope I responded to that. If not, just please give me a follow-up.
I'm looking for hands from the audience now.
Okay. Oh, now I see you. Okay.
Hello. I'm just wondering about your example and division in you and prominent authors, because in communist time, publication of books was an instrument of pressure, and it was possible to be a prominent author and do not to have books published, just publication in the press, for example.
Yeah. Yes, precisely. There's really good example. So we did it qualitatively, basically. So we knew. So for instance, I don't. You still see my screen or no? Okay, if you don't, it doesn't matter. So one of the most prominent. I mean, we in the network we have two most prominent authors. One was Adam Mickiewicz, our romantic bard, and the other was Czesław Miłosz, so a Nobel Prize winner from the 1980, who actually was banned afterwards in Poland, so he was not featured at all. But however, we know, of course, that he was eminent writer, and that he in underground writing he was also very kind of visible. So he was not published officially, but in the second circulation. So we knew he had the status of this great master. But you're totally right that this is a problem. Again, I think it kind of falls under this issue I discussed about you have to know your data. So you have to know this thing. But also, in our case, the problem is when we are digitizing our resource, is that, as you said, there's a censorship. I mean, there's censorship both on what was published, but also sometimes there was a censorship on what could go into the bibliography as well. I mean, it was like really rare, but the said Czesław Miłosz was the example of a person who was there was like this official it was called Zapis, which is a kind of record, this kind of thing that you cannot feature him anywhere. So he couldn't be featured in the bibliography. We do have, although, the bibliography of the second circulation, and we want to kind of combine those resources. But yeah, just to ensure this is an excellent example of how you have to be aware of those conditions of creation of your data in order to properly work with them.
So then I will ask my own question. So in early years of theorizing about cultural analytics, and also Franco Moretti talked about this, they like the metaphor of evolution, like they compared cultural development to natural evolution. And do you think that this metaphor is useful at all? Do you see that it can be modeled in analogous to natural development?
Yeah, actually, also great you're mentioning it. So the work, one of the backbones of this evolution approach by Moretti was the work he did actually on bibliographical data, and also a good example because he also collected them on his own. So basically, this was the evolution of genres I'm referring to. So what he did was for Victorian novel, he looked for genre classification of books, and by genre I mean also like a kind of really detailed genre. So it was not like just I don't know, romance or something, but like I don't remember right now the actual terms there, but they were like, let's say 50 or like 40 different subgenres of Gothic novel, for instance, and romance, etc., etc. So what he did was looking to when they are published, and the idea was that those kind of this development of those or popularity of those genres kind of overlaps with let's say with a generation. I mean, like 20 years time, and then you have kind of evolution, cultural evolution, that there are like some new forms emerging. And I would say it's a kind of really, of course, a compelling argument, and the data-driven methods kind of allow you to model something like that, to look at this evolution. However, my biggest problem with this is kind of still the concept of time here in a way. So when we work with bibliographical data, we have a year of publication as this kind of a cornerstone of our work. So everything is kind of segmented. So we measure, for instance, the network within the year and what happens next. But still, we don't have this kind of continuity, because like things happen in different months or something like this. So we cannot see how things actually happen. Sometimes what researchers do would be to use like the moving average. So we kind of want to see it like more like a flow. So if there's a peak, so you kind of average results from the year before, year after, and it's kind of smooth down. So you can see those processes, and I would say that in general, I would kind of agree with this idea that we can, that of course, culture evolve, we can try to measure it. But then again, I would be very cautious about what kind of data we use for this. I would say that this study by Moretti would be probably the best example I know of for this argument that that it's really really compelling because of the unusual for him trust in diligence with the data. So that would be my eclectic response.
Thanks for the presentation. I have a question. You had a slide where you distinguished small and big publishers, and I just wanted to ask from methodological point of view, because it's kind of easy to see who is big publisher. It's an established publishing company publishing over years, and then I kind of can imagine like a smaller art house publishing house, but still working over years. But what about those individuals or NGOs which just publish 1 or 2 books? Can you maybe expand a bit more how you made this threshold between small and big, and are there subcategories inside the small?
Thanks. Yeah, another great question about like how you operationalize things. So in this case, I went, because also I didn't have much information about those publishers. I mean, so what I have is approximately 900 publishers, but as you mentioned, some of them are like serious publishing houses. Some of them are like, let's say, less prominent or like indie publishers, but some of them are just those whatever cultural centers in small cities, for instance, but they have status of publisher because they published the work. So there are, let's say, 2 ways to work with it. One is, let's say, the ideal way, which was not, and it's still not so much available for me, is to actually get some external data about those publishers. So, from Wikidata, from other sources. Maybe in some countries you can have registers of publishers to get more information, for instance, when they were established. So unfortunately, I don't have this data. I just have the name, and which also. If we zoom back to the slide with the puzzles, it also kind of makes things more difficult because I cannot, for instance, as you said, use the let's say the issue of when the publisher was funded, for instance. However, what I did, so this is to respond to your question, was to kind of operationalize who is big and who is small. And so I basically took the threshold of yearly production. And it's actually, I'm a bit ashamed here because I don't remember the exact number, but we'll look at it at the moment. But I just took basically, and I think that what I would do now, so probably what I did then, I think that 10% let's say, of the publishers that have the largest number of books in a given year, basically. So to see this kind of concentration. So you can be in this methodology, you can be a small publisher in one year and big publisher in another, although not so much likely. But it still shows you that the number of books by big publishers, but this 10% is getting higher and higher. So that means that the smaller group of publishers gets more and more books published every year. But there's one way to do it. I wouldn't say it's the best one who worked for me, but definitely there could be other ways to achieve that. And what you have to do basically doing this is just to be clear about your choices and operationalizations.
So looking for hands, I have so many questions so that probably I'm happy that not so many hands are up today. So first I have a comments. So I know from publishing industry developments in Latvia that although the number of titles published every year is not decreasing, and also due to the fact that many authors are self-publishing, and there are companies who publish amateur authors, and so the number of titles published every year is not really decreasing, but the print runs are. And first of all, do you have access to this information? Because I know that in Latvia it's like sometimes treated as a commercial secret. Do you take into account the print runs too in your research?
The quick question is, I'd love to, but it's just it's a commercial thing, and I mean it's probably not impossible. But there's in the case of my data, it's also the question of whether the records exist at all, because also I'm dealing with stuff that happened 30 years ago. So already for, let's say, existing publishers, it probably could be the case, or for some but in some cases, that the data may be even lost. So I'd say that we don't have print runs, and they are not since some moment they're not public. They used to be public, for instance, in the 80s, but they are not. And unfortunately, even when they were public, our bibliography did not collect them. But I must say that my, let's say, dream research would be actually to combine all those different sources. So, to start with bibliography. So we already have those relationships that you published something, you got reviewed, you got an award. That's one thing. Another thing would be circulation. But then, of course, what you can get is the book loans in libraries. That's an excellent resource. I tried to look into it in Poland, but maybe in other countries it will look differently. But in Poland, unfortunately, what we could get for those years before the electronic loans were introduced is just some rankings of the top books, top books on loan in certain area, but not just the list of 10 or 20, not the entire thing. So that's one thing, and also you can look at booksellers list. So another thing to add. So not one thing is a circulation, the other is the commercial success. And finally, I mean, starting, let's say, with the 21st century, there's also the internet, right? So the mentions, there is already ongoing a big research on, such providers like Goodreads or something like this, but they have this great data. But of course, it's difficult also for the commercial property of this data to reach it. So that's the long response is that I would love to find this kind of aggregated model for research to combine those sources, but probably that would need the it would need a smaller scale. So again, returning to the operationalization thing, that you probably, to collect such big data, you have to probably narrow down to a particular, I don't know, decade, few years, or even a year to have it. And the short question, the short answer to your question is that unfortunately not. I don't have those data available, but I would really love to have.
So there, one small question in the chat. You mentioned a number of books. Are you referring to number as types of books or the units published?
Mm-hmm. Another great question. In this case, that's just books in general. The same goes for articles, because we have the journal articles. We have also different types of it in the database. But in this research design, I focused mostly on books as such, which is also tricky for Poland, as especially in this period, we also have lots of poetry books published. So this is the stuff, for instance, which would get published in those small cultural houses. So that this is like this kind of local author wrote some poetry and get it published. So we have lots of books like that. And I'm planning in, let's say, the further iterations of this work to look more closely actually to different genres. But right now it's just the books.
Thank you. We are out of time, and I didn't have time to ask my main question. So how do you see the future of the book? If you can summarize it in just a few words.
Future of the book in a few words. Oh my God. The book in general, or book research? Of the book. Okay. So
yes,
I would say
as a medium
of the book, as a medium. I mean, as we can see, I mean, another excellent question. I mean, my dissertation was also about, which was also like ages ago, about the book and the new media, and we can see there are like new types of storytelling. Interactive fiction, interactive non-fiction as well, published, video games, etc. But still there's this need for a book as a kind of a vehicle for this kind of narrative, closed story, and that has, that's finite. And I would say the book as a concept will survive. I mean, it doesn't probably matter if it's in paper or on your ebook reader or on your screen, but as a book as a concept, I think it will definitely prevail, because this is like also the way how we try to communicate, like longer arguments, but also longer stories. Yeah, so that would be my short question, few words, how I see it.
Okay, thank you, and let's give another round of applause.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure, and I wish I was there in person.
Yes, we wish that too. Maybe we will meet another time. So goodbye. Hopefully. And we will go into the break, and let's meet again in the workshop sessions.
Thank you so much. And just contact me if you have any further questions.